Today's topic is specifically relating to Servoy Smart Client. I expect that a lot of you old school veterans are here, and I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list. However, if you are new to Servoy or you just picked up this on the recording, I think that this webinar demonstrates that Servoy technology stack continues to evolve with the changing technology landscape, and you can stay in business and keep your apps running for many, many years. Let's get started. This is all about deploying Smart Client in today's Java. As you probably know, Java is changing, Oracle is changing the terms of Java all the time. Java security is becoming tighter and tighter, and thus it becomes more challenging to deploy applications that run on Java, and that includes Servoy's desktop client, the Smart Client. So today I will do a few demos. First, I'll show you how to run the Smart Client on the latest Java. So this is after Java 8. After Java 8, things become a bit trickier. Then I will also show a demo of how to run the Smart Client without having Java pre-installed. So if you have users that don't have Java installed, then this demo is for you. Finally, I'll show a quick variation on one of the demos on how to change startup Args to enable sort of a multi-tenant distribution. So let's get that going. I'm going to start with Servoy Developer. Here I have a application that I built that is just hello world, one form, pretty simple. And I am running the classic web server, Servoy server locally here. And I have deployed this to that server this morning. Now, what I'd like to do is run this application via the Smart Client, but without the need for Java Web Start. Java Web Start is the particular technology that allows you to distribute the JNLP file. Users can double click and it just launches and downloads all your resources, and your application is always up to date. That is deprecated from Java in Java 11. The moment you upgrade from 8, you will no longer be able to just distribute the JNLP file as you always have done. So in order to do that, let's get started. In every distribution of the Servoy installation, there is a file called bootstrap.jar. I'm going into the latest stable release of Servoy, the 2019.03 build, and in there, if you go into Application Server, then to the Tomcat server, and to the Web Apps root folder, you will find bootstrap.jar. So what I recommend is that you copy it from the distribution, and don't worry about this path. This is in the wiki documentation, so you can refer to that later to get the exact path. But you copy this, and so what I typically do is make a space somewhere. I'll come back here and make a new folder. I already tested this morning. I called it my distribution, so I'll call it my distribution 2, for example. And I'm going to paste it in there. So now I'm creating sort of a workspace where I can generate the distribution that I'm going to give to my customers. The next thing we'll want to do is to crack open that jar and change some configurations. Now, a jar file, although it pertains to Java, is really just a zip file renamed to .jar. So if you want to crack open a jar file, there's two ways to do it, I would say. One is rename it to .zip, sort of temporarily, and then your default zip program should open it straight away. The other thing you can do is to get a zip program that allows you to open a jar file without changing it. So I have WinRAR installed in mine, so I'm going to right click and open with WinRAR. Of course, it's a trial version, so oops. So I got the pop-up. Now, when you first open this up, basically what this contains is the meta-inf folder with some manifest information, the basic core parts of the binary, which you don't really need to get into, and then the bootstrap.properties, which is meant to configure the bootstrapper. I'm going to right-click this and actually I'm just going to double-click it, and that launches it in, for me, Notepad++. Depending on your setup, you might have to sort of extract it and edit it and then put it back in. So there's a few parameters here that we want to make note of. The first one is the code base. This is where the application server lives. And the second one is the solution. These are the two most important because you're basically telling the bootstrapper where to go to get the application. You might notice that that the default says localhost 8080 /test. This is sort of implying a what we call a context in Tomcat. So this is kind of implying a war file distribution. So running a war distribution on a Tomcat server. If you are running a classic Servoy server, and I know many of you are, you probably will just go right to the root of the classic server. And that's what I'm doing here. And next is the solution. The solution name that I had in developer, what I just showed you, was Hello World. So I'm going to change that to Hello World. And I'm not going to change anything else at this time. I'm going to save this in Notepad. And if I go back to WinRAR, I get sort of a notification that it was modified. You want to update it in the archive. This is particular to the zip tool that I'm using. It sort of puts a monitor on a temp file and it watches it, and then when it changes it, it gives you the option to add it back into the archive. If you're doing this sort of just in like plain Notepad and just plain WinZip, you might have to actually extract the file, edit it, save it, and then copy it back into the archive to update it. But I'm just going to click yes. So now the configuration file has been updated. And I'm almost ready to run this. There's one other thing to make note of, and that is this this particular distribution has code signing in it. If you're going to distribute with code signing and you've modified the jar file, then the code signing is basically invalid because the checksum would be different. So what I'm going to do is come in here to the web or metainf folder, and I'm going to, for now, delete the code signing. Although probably for like real production purposes, you want to sign it yourself. So after you've made the modifications, use your code signing tool to sign the jar file, and then you'll be good to distribute it. So I'm going to delete the Servoy company code signing here. So now this is an unsigned jar file, but since it's just a local jar file, I shouldn't get any security issues. So now this is the complete contents of the bootstrap.jar. I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm done. And if I go back to Explorer, I am now ready to run bootstrap.jar without Java Web Start. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. I'm going to do this by double clicking. And you can see that it launches the Smart Client. Give it a minute to download the application. And there's my Hello World running in the Smart Client. Now, that was great, and that was pretty easy. However, it gets a bit more complicated because the double-click action is still pegged to Java 8 that I have installed here. So if your users are running, have Java 11 on there already, or more likely they don't have any Java, then that will not work. There won't be anything associated with that file to run it. So the next demo that I'm going to show you is how to distribute Java with your application such that your users don't have to install Java. You could do this, especially for those of you that have sort of in-house applications and your employees use the application and you can train them on what to do, or maybe IT sort of controls the whole environment. You can install any version of Java, and you could also run this via command line, Java -jar bootstrap.jar, and it will work on any version of Java. It's not that you can't run it right now on any version of Java, but the double-click thing isn't going to happen. So let's assume that you're distributing this to end users, and you have to assume they don't have any Java installed or they don't have the right Java installed. So let's do the next part of the demo, which is to show you how to bundle a Java runtime with your distribution. To do this, we're going to bypass Oracle and go to the OpenJDK project, which is the sort of open source version of the JRE. It's kind of identically the same feature for feature. It's just the licensing is different and the maintenance is different. So I'm going here to the website and I'm going to download a JRE. First thing you want to do is pick a version, and you go back to Java 8 or up to the very latest. And the next thing you'll do is pick a JVM style. I always choose a hotspot for what I'm working on. So the next thing you would do is you would download, and I want to point out that don't download the installer. You actually just want to download the zip because you're not installing it on your machine. You want to just distribute it to your user. So I'm going to skip the download because I've already downloaded it, and you can see it over here in my tray. So once the download is complete, all you have to do is open that up in your favorite zip tool and extract this out. I'm just going to select it and copy it. And I'm going to go back to my distribution folder here, and I'm going to paste it in there. And just to make things simpler, I'm going to just rename this to JRE. So now I have a folder with the JRE installed in it. However, this file still, if I have no Java installed, it's not going to do anything. The next thing to do is to either fire up the command console and run java -jar, which you're not going to do if you're a new user. So I'm going to create a little bat file to make it easier. So I'm going to come in here to Notepad. And I'm going to type in one command, and it's actually jre/bin javaw.exe -jar, and it is bootstrap.jar. And you can name that. You don't have to name it bootstrap. You could, if you want to brand it, you can name it whatever you want. It just has to have the .jar extension, and when you create the bat file, you want to reference it correctly. So I'm going to save that, and I'll put it right in the folder that I was working in. And I'm going to call this, I'll just call it run.bat, and I don't want that txt extension, so we'll put all types. Okay, so so I've saved my bat file. If I go back to my distribution here, I should be able to now run this, and instead of it picking the default Java that I have, which is associated with this file, Java 8, is actually going to go to this folder here, JRE bin, and then find the executable to run it. So let's try it out. I've done something wrong. Let me open up a version of the bat file that I already have, because perhaps I have a typo. JRE bin, you see, that looks right. They look identical. Well, let me try this from the command line here. Okay, so I'll go to my my directory where I made the distribution, and it would be JRE bin javaw.exe -jar bootstrap.jar. Okay, that works. So maybe something wrong with my bat file. Okay, so this, if we go to help about, now you can see that the Java version is 11.03. When I didn't show you, but when I double clicked on it, it was running Java 8, the default install that I had that allows me to double click. So this is how you would set it up for someone who doesn't already have Java installed. The final step, and I am so curious why this isn't running. I could show you on the other one that I made this morning, which was this one here. But that one had the jar file removed. I don't know. This was working the last 3 times that I did it. I will try to figure this out and I'll update it in the follow-up forum post. The next thing that you would do is you would finally just compress this, so you could send to compressed folder and zip it up, and then put this on your website for your users to download. And the instructions would be that they would extract it, and they could then run the bat file. There's a couple of other options you could do. One is you can make a shortcut to run the bat file. And you can change the icon, which you saw in this one that I did earlier this morning. I made a little shortcut which just runs this bat file, and you can see the way to do that is in the shortcut properties. You remove the start in and you put this in, this is a shortcut for the command prompt. It's a system variable, and basically you just run the bat file that way. The other option is more work, but gives perhaps a nicer user experience, is to create a real exe. And there's tools for doing that. There's tools for even converting a bat file to an exe. It's a bit more work, but then you give something a bit more friendly to your user, either an installer or something that is at least double clickable, like a self-extracting zip that runs something. So there are other options, but this should get you going. This is a zip file, pretty much double click and then run the or extract and then run the bat file. The final demo that I wanted to show you was that these solutions can still accept startup arguments. So typically, if you were having startup arguments, you might hard code them into your JNLP, or when they hit the web server that generates the JNLP, they might be hitting a deep link. So I want to show you how to simulate that. First thing I'll do is enable the application to accept the startup argument. I'm going in here to, well, first of all, the onSolutionOpen event of my application. And this is triggered as soon as the application is open. And this is where you accept startup arguments. Those of you are probably familiar with this if you build applications in Servoy. And so basically, I'm setting a global variable here to capture it. The default is world, and it's going to say hello world. But over here on the form, I'm going to change this. And instead of world, I will put that, substitute in that variable. Okay. The next thing I'll do is create a new export of this. And finally, I'm going to come over to my application server, and I'm going to import it. I had this sort of queued up and ready to go, so we'll just grab the latest one. So that is now deployed. If I come back to my distribution and double click bootstrap.jar, we should get something kind of funky here. Hello owner 1. So remember that when we configured this, again, I'm going to crack this open. I get this warning about the trial version, and I'm going to edit bootstrap.properties. Any of these arguments could have values, so you can pass in system properties, which would be more like at the Java level, but we could also pass in something with a prefix of argument, and then anything after that is what gets passed in as the main startup arg for Servoy. And this is just a string. Typically people put colons so they can split on it, or you might have name equal value or something. So this could be renamed to Servoy friends, and I'm going to save that. And if I come back here again, WinRAR is kind enough to remind me to update it in the archive, but it's running, so it can't do it. Let me close that and try this again. This is what happened before. Okay. Let me just make sure the edit stuck. So again, I'm going to edit this. Yeah, it didn't stick because I couldn't put it back in. Hello, Servoy friends. I save it. Yes, I want to update it in the archive. So now it's back in the archive. And now I should be able to run this, passing in a startup argument, which should make its way all the way into the application, and we should see hello Servoy friends. Yay. Okay, so that third example is how to parameterize. Now, it gets a bit tricky if you really want to pass those in from outside the distribution, but I don't see a strong use case for that because you want to give something to your users that's sort of all-inclusive. But it could be something that you want to have them set it in an environment variable maybe. But this would be like you give sort of a slightly configured distribution from one tenant to another tenant for their deployment. And you only have to change the configuration. You don't have to change anything in the packaging. And you also would have noticed that when I updated the Servoy application, there's no maintenance on the executable. Once you push a change to the Servoy server, it's live. It's not like you have to rebuild that every time because it's just pointing to the application server. Everything runs as it did before, so you're always on the latest version. The only time you need to rebuild the executable is if you want to change startup arguments or if you want to change Java versions or tweak some system parameters or something like that. But your application, as you build it in Servoy, they'll always be on the latest because it's just pointing to the Servoy server URL. Okay, so that concludes the demo portion. A bit long, but there was a lot to cover. Let me run through a quick overview because there was perhaps a lot to digest. And during this time, you could bring your questions in, and I'll try to answer them at the end. The first thing we did was just to run the bootstrap.jar. So that means not with Java Web Start. And that was pretty simple. All we had to do was grab that bootstrap.jar out of the default distribution, which is in the root web app with any Servoy installation, and then open it up. Remember, I used a zip tool called WinRAR, but you could use the zip tool of your choice. You want to take that .properties file and edit it, and then put it back in the archive. So the first thing to note is the URL. If you do war deployments with the smart client, you do want to go all the way out to that context. So it would be the server URL / and then the web app context. If you do classic server, you don't have that. You just go right to the :8080 or whatever port you run on. The other thing is obviously change the solution name. And of course, the moment that you modify the contents of the jar file, you break the code signing, the checksum. So ideally, you just remove the signing, or perhaps better is re-sign it with your own signing certificates when you're done. Although you could see that I was able to run it without security complaints from Java because it's just a local jar file. So after that, you're done, except for the fact that you're assuming at this point that your users still have Java already installed, and either they are on Java 8, so they could double click it, I think, or I think Java 9 you could too, but Java 9 was just a bridge. Most people are on 8 or 11. Or they could do the command line and do Java -jar and that sort of thing. And you could also have a bat file that does that. So if you ran in a controlled environment where IT manages everything and everyone has Java already installed and they're using a prepared machine, then you could just distribute a bat file even, and they could just double click that and you'd be done. And you could still be running on, say, Java 11. However, I got to assume that you guys have users where you don't control their environment. You don't want to ask them to pre-install Java and run some command. So the next demo was about creating a Jre distribution. You can get any version from OpenJDK, get the zip distribution, not the installer, and all you got to do is pull that out and put it in your own sort of distribution folder sitting right next to bootstrap.jar. And then the last step is to create a bat file. I don't know why it didn't work in the demo. It worked every time I did it this morning. I did it a few times. So I'll look into that and get you an answer. But rest assured, it does work. It's just running a system command. So by the way, for Mac users, you could do a bash script, same sort of thing. And then once you have that, you can compress it and just give your customers a zip file with the instructions to extract it and double click the bat file. It's also possible to take that and distribute it as a self-extracting zip or an exe. And that would give a more polished user experience. But again, that's a bit more work, so it's up to you if you want to go to that next level. There are sort of forums and documentation on how to do that and tools that help you with that. In particular, converting a bat file to an exe, I think is not so tricky. Last thing that I showed you was how to change startup arguments. Of course, you want to enable your solution via the onSolutionOpen event to accept startup arguments, and then you can pass them in directly from the Bootstrap properties file. So you would change that properties file and maybe make several distributions where each one is slightly configured differently, and then you could give sort of the multi-tenant switch. That's the main use case for this, so that you could still host a multi-tenant application, but it's clear to identify which tenant is coming in just by the distribution that they got. I'm going to come back to Servoy World. I'm going to take questions now, and I'll leave up these useful links while I take the questions. This is documented on our wiki.servoy.com. You just search for bootstrap.jar. Also, there's a link there for the OpenJDK. Again, these webinars are all recorded, so you can catch this again once we post the recording, and you can post your feedback and questions on the forum. Let me look for my applications. Or is Jan here? Jan is here.
Hi. I'm sorry for coming late to the party today.
Well, I hope you didn't miss all the fun. We have a lot of questions. Can you help me with those?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question from Ruben. Will there be a tutorial on how to create a real installer?
A real installer?
Example with a desktop icon to make the UX better.
Yeah, I wanted to try to include something for this, but it would have probably doubled the webinar length, and it was maybe a bit out of scope. But I think that what we can do is probably post some instructions or point you to some good resources for that. It's really kind of at that point, it's not really even Servoy anymore. If this is a hot topic, though, we could come back and do a follow-up and just sort of how to take a distribution that I had just made and convert that to something like an exe.
Okay. Then Ruben suggested that you had your slashes wrong in your bat file.
Yeah, I think that was it. Was that it? I got to find out.
Let's stop the webinar.
That was it. Yeah, there you go. No, this is important. What's the next question? Thanks, Ruben.
There was a question from Wim. Is it Java W or Java WS?
Java WS is dead in Java 11, so it would be Java W. Java WS is Java Web Start, which is what we won't have in Java 11.
Okay, that's good to know. Java WS is dead. Java W is still there. Okay.
There, it's fixed. Thanks,
I
Ruben.
think that's it for the questions. As we've learned all today, your slashes are important when you're putting them in Windows or Mac.
Windows slashes.
Forward in Windows and
yeah. One other thing that I didn't mention that is perhaps relevant, that running Servoy developer on the latest Java requires that you also make a configuration change to point it to the right JRE. There's documentation on that already, but I have heard people ask about that. So it's kind of a related thing, but I wouldn't worry about it too much because your developers are capable of editing a config file. Your users maybe not so much. Finally, I just want to bring up the previous slide as we go out and remind all of you, since most of you are veterans, Servoy World is November 6th to 9th. I expect all of you to participate in the hackathon. That should be a lot of fun, and we could use people that have deep experience in Servoy as well. Jan, do you know about the status of the Movenpick?
I'm not sure, but my advice is if you want to stay at that hotel, that you book as soon as possible. Obviously, there are plenty of other hotels and Airbnbs in Amsterdam, but if you want to stay at the conference hotel, then sooner is better than later.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll post the recording shortly.